Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Whip Around's In the Know series. Today, we're going to be talking about how to build a super safety program. For any of you that joined us, what was really only a couple of weeks ago when we did a bit of a deep dive on the safety management cycle, I think this is a really natural evolution into that to look at a much broader safety program type initiative for your carrier. As always, it's not just me bringing the expertise in here. We have our old friends from Whip Around, the gentlemen from Qualification Transport Consulting, Sean and Dave. Welcome. We've got a lot of people on here that I think will know you guys from some of our previous webinars and videos that we've done, but I might hand over to you, Sean, quickly first, and then Dave, just a little bit of a background on yourselves and also Scopelitis.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Appreciate the time here. Sean Garney, I'm Vice President here at Scopelitis Transportation Consulting. Been around trucking for over 20 years, started as a driver and a dock worker. Been a broker, worked for the government for a little bit. 10 years at ATA, that's where I met Dave Oshecki, my partner in crime here. He's been running STC for about, 5 years now, and we help carriers comply. We help carriers build safety programs. We help vendors like you educate in the industry. That's kind of where we're at. Dave?
Yeah, good job, Sean. And again, Dave Oshecki. I'm the president of Scopelitis Transportation Consulting, and it's great to be back. Thanks, Tim, for the opportunity to do this. I'm 35 years into transportation and trucking safety. I spent first 10 years at the U.S. government writing the rules, and as my brother-in-law likes to say, I switched sides and went to the ATA to help carriers sort of take the test, understand the rules, if you will. And as Sean said, for the last 5 years, I've been running, and I helped launch the Scopelitis Transportation Consulting business, which is owned by the Scopelitis Law Firm. We're here to talk about, super safety programs and how to get there, how to develop them, and really looking forward to it. So thanks again, Tim.
Fantastic. And no, thank you guys. We get a huge amount of value. The feedback that we get from these webinars and the other videos that we do is really great. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today. We've got a lot of Whip Around customers on the webinar today, so thank you for that. We have a bunch of people who are interested in this that aren't Whip Around customers. But for those of you that don't know me, my name's Tim Boyle. I'm the co-founder of Whip Around. We'll touch on Whip Around briefly a little bit later in this presentation, but Whip Around essentially is a fleet maintenance management provider built with compliance and safety in mind. And I think what we'll be able to recap at the end of this is how Whip Around can really set you up for success when it comes to building a super safety program. What we're going to cover today, some really broad buckets of what contributes to a super safety program. We're going to cover culture, people, technology, data, and as I mentioned, a quick recap of how Whip Around can really support all of that for your business. And with no further ado, I'll hand over to you, Sean, to kick us off.
Yeah, I'll take that hand off, and I'm going to hand it right to Dave because I think he'll talk about culture and people. Dave?
All right, yeah. And we're going to split this up, Sean and I, and then we'll hand it back to Tim when we're done. And we'll start with culture. And culture is something that maybe some people have a hard time sort of wrapping their arms around, or their hands around, or their head around. It's something that's pretty easy to see and feel, but it's not something that's sort of easy to create. And what it is at a very high level, and this is really important for a fleet and fleet safety performance, is having a really, really good safety culture. And at a high level, it's a set of, as the slide indicates, a set of shared beliefs and attitudes and really values of the organization, which are then sort of followed. The values then sort of boil down or bring down to the individuals within the organization. And it's really the values and practices across the organization as it relates to safety. And I like to use this word. I really like to use the word lens. And because a lens is something you look through, right? Culture is the lens through which workers see how a company feels, and more importantly, how the company acts on safety on a day-to-day basis. I mean, yes, you can talk about safety, you can message safety, you can have safety policies, but really what it comes down to is how do you manage safety in the workplace day in and day out? So that's a sort of a high-level viewpoint or explanation of safety culture. And quickly the question becomes, why does this really matter? And does it matter? And our view, and our short answer is absolutely it matters. And before I talk to some of the information on this slide, let me say this. We recently looked at, reviewed, and actually wrote some written material for a newsletter that we do at Scope Leaders about a particular research project. That it's a case study research report. It was done by the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute a couple of years ago, and it interviewed 9 carriers, 9 fleets in the U.S. that were determined to have improved their safety performance in significant ways by reduced crashes, improved CSA scores, and a number of other measures. And the reason I bring it up is because safety culture was one of the things that all of these fleets talked about and the importance of that culture. So I wanted to sort of tee that up, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later. But culture, why does it matter? Well, it really sets the assumptions of the workers and the beliefs of the workers, and that then drives their behavior. And it's, of course, the behavior of your workers in a fleet, and particularly the drivers, right, that determines your results, determine your performance as an organization. From a safety standpoint, and of course from a productivity and organizational standpoint as well. So it really does matter. Having a great culture, it really matters from a safety standpoint. So how do you, bringing it down a little bit, 1 or 2 levels, how do you connect safety with your culture? Or I suppose you can think of it as the opposite. How do you connect your culture with safety? And there are some things that you can clearly do sort of in a practical way to do this, to connect safety with your culture and vice versa. You can define safety and should define safety as a core value. You've probably, all heard the saying, don't create it as a priority, don't call it a priority, define it as a priority, because priorities change, and that's absolutely true. If it's a core value of the organization, of your fleet, it doesn't change. It doesn't go away. It's at the center of everything that you do, all of your decision making. Consistently demonstrated as that core value. Okay, what the heck does that mean? How do I do that? Well, one of the things that can be done is consistently have the top management of their organization should be communicating safety messages, should be communicating with staff. Think about it from the driver standpoint. If top management shows up at monthly or weekly driver safety meetings and is engaged in the safety message and engaged in the safety discussion, that's one way to consistently demonstrate safety as a core value of the organization. And then there are some other things in the slide about, creating an environment. I think there's 3 different bullets here that talk about creating an environment to do certain things. An environment that really reinforces personal accountability for safety. And what that means is we're not just talking about drivers, we're talking about everybody across the organization. Everybody has a role in safety, and everybody has to be accountable to make good safety decisions going forward, in the organization. So that's one aspect of the environment. 2 other aspects are, encouraging drivers to speak up when they have good ideas, good safety ideas that maybe could be implemented, but also speaking up when they have safety concerns, either with the equipment or maybe with other drivers or with somebody in the maintenance shop or whatever. So all of those things go to the environment. And the piece that I didn't mention about the environment is, speaking up when you have safety concerns without fear of retribution, right? You don't want to take actions against people who speak up in those ways. So that's just a few ideas and a few ways to connect safety with your culture. And I think we're going to stop there, maybe, Tim, and talk about a few, maybe is that
yeah, it's an interesting point. And listening to you, and we spoke to a couple of our customers prior to this who sort of fed some questions into us as well. But you mentioned the different types of cultures there, and I guess it's becomes obvious that cultures can be good and bad. And so obviously some businesses may have bad safety culture, but in the sort of chase for a good safety culture, a positive safety culture that you touched on, what are some of the tools that maybe are used by businesses that are developing a good safety culture? Are there different ways that you can incentivize people, and is that effective, whether it's drivers or operators, around good safety behavior? What sort of artifacts might you have distributed around the business or displayed that you might have seen to help build something in a really positive way?
Yeah. So, to the first part of your question, there are different types of culture, and the type that you really want to have as a trucking company, as a fleet, is a constructive one that really sort of stretches, one that is proactive and doesn't just look at status quo as just fine. It's always sort of pushing the envelope on safety. It's pushing the envelope on doing the right thing, and it's sort of that change before you have to, change before the government requires you. Look at technologies, look at new programs, evaluate them to see if they make sense for your business. So a proactive, constructive, culture is just that, something that's somebody in an organization that looks forward, that tests technologies, that adopts technologies, and it also values performance and recognizes performance and good performance. On the flip side, I mean, we've probably all heard about, and maybe we've even worked in organizations that have sort of the opposite culture, the culture that's maybe destructive or defensive, that status quo is good. We're not pushing the envelope. We like what we're doing. We don't need new technology. We're doing just fine. We don't need scorecards. We don't need benchmarking, those types of things. So it's really how you look at it. And I do like the idea of in a constructive culture with safety in mind, is having benchmarking, having driver scorecards. And the benchmarking is internal benchmarking against certain things you want to measure, but also external benchmarking, measuring yourself against people in your portion of the industry. So those are two different types of cultures. There's some artifacts that we talked about. I mentioned, about consistently communicating from the top, consistently communicating safety messages, having regular safety meetings, and talking about safety issues with the drivers and others. So that's a lot of words, just some things that came to mind when you asked the question.
Yeah, and I kind of want to jump in here too. I was thinking about this the other day in preparation of this webinar, and one of the things that really struck me about safety culture, and we do audits of carriers, gap analysis, and that sort of thing, and safety culture is something that often comes up, and the carrier is very interested in, well, how do I get that safety culture? And we list 5 or 6 different things that you can do that would really help build that safety culture. But sometimes where we fail is to remind carriers that culture isn't built overnight.
Right.
Dave talks about consistency, about continuing to push the envelope. And that's the sort of thing that demonstrates your safety culture over and over again until it becomes more of a priority, more than a priority, and a core value, right? You can't just, your CEO can't say, now we have a great safety culture. They need to put their money where their mouth is, and their energy and the people into deciding that this is a core value and living it every day. That's just one thing I want to jump in on there.
Totally. And I guess you talk about the responsibility being shared by management, obviously being led from the front, but having someone, and looking back again to the safety management cycle piece that we did a few weeks back, Sean, roles and responsibilities, having someone that really is mandated to go and look for new technologies, to own the benchmarks and the metrics and all of that, is that quite an important piece of developing that culture, having some sort of central ownership or role in there, you think?
Yeah, I do think, and I know Dave's going to talk about people, but you got to have the resources, and you got to sort of have a field marshal, right? You got to have somebody whose job it is to beat that drum, and lots of people to sort of facilitate that, right? Lots of people that are going to buy in. You can't just give it to the driver, right? That's what we talked about a couple weeks ago, right, Tim? You can't just give it to the driver and say, hey, driver, it's your job. Be safe. Do all the right things, You got to hold management accountable too, and management has to hold the CFO accountable. Hey, I don't have the tools I need, to be successful here. It's an organizational push, not an individual push. That's
and I'll add on and just maybe use a safe or sports analogy. Think about either basketball or football, and I'm talking American football, Tim. The football, yeah, you can have everybody on the team, but somebody's got to be the quarterback. Right? Somebody has to hand the ball, throw the ball, and sort of run make sure everybody knows what play is being run. Same thing with basketball. You need a point guard. We're in the midst of this NCAA, Final Four tournament, right? And the good teams have great point guards. And again, that's sort of the analogy to the safety leader in a fleet. That's the point guard. That's the quarterback for safety policies, safety programs, evaluation of safety technologies and implementations, looking at the scorecard and making sense of it and all those types of things. So absolutely.
Fantastic.
All right. So I think that runs the culture piece. And again, I don't want to, go too far down that road, but it really is an essential part and component of a safe fleet going forward. But so are people, right? I mean, you have to start with the right people, and we're talking about trucking, we're talking about safety and transportation. You have to hire and retain the right people because they're different, right? Hiring is one thing, retaining is another, and you have to keep your eye on both balls, so to speak. So the right organization with the right safety culture, gives the hiring managers clear direction, clear policies to hire the right people, and starting with the right people is certainly critical. Well, how do you do that? What gets you there? Well, good pre-employment screening practices get you there. Particularly, again, we're thinking about drivers here, but you could broaden this out a little bit. Identifying the right people through screening practices, but also screening out the wrong people. Of course, that's just as important. And when you get there, when you screen in and hire the right people, you ultimately increase driver retention. And that's linked to culture. You can increase driver retention and maintain really good driver retention if your culture is strong. And ultimately, you end up with better safety performance, right? Reduce crashes, reduce turnover, maybe not as much training, so there's some reduced costs there as well. And a second or third component of that is you also increase the company's reputation as a good carrier, as a safe carrier, a company that people want to work for, drivers want to go to. And I think, we've all seen examples of both of the, both sides of this coin, right? The good carriers, everybody kind of wants to hire on. I'm thinking one in particular out of Arkansas, as a matter of fact, in my head. And then there are lots of other carriers out there maybe don't have the same strong reputation. So what are some of the more effective screening practices? And again, we pulled this information from some recent research that was done specific to the transportation and trucking industry, specific to fleets that are hiring drivers, commercial drivers. So performance testing, and really that goes to skills testing. That goes to an honest to goodness road test to determine the skills of the person that you're considering putting behind the wheel of that large commercial vehicle. So that's absolutely essential to the companies that were interviewed for this. Of course, background checks. I mean, everybody does some form of a background check at the fleet level, but to do as many as possible, in a reasonable time frame. Of course, you got to do MVRs. You have to do past employment checks and drug and alcohol history checks, but you can go beyond that. You can get credit check, you can get criminal history checks, and so forth. So the broader and better your background checking process is, the more likely you are to hire the right people. Drug screening is the third best practice, if you will, from a pre-employment screening. Again, of course, part of this is required by the DOT, but then there are fleets that are safe, responsible fleets that go beyond the DOT drug testing on the pre-employment side. They either test a hair sample or they test an oral fluid sample. And again, it's a best practice to sort of not only do the DOT, but go beyond. The fourth is personality testing. Personal face-to-face interviews. That's what that really means. Not so much, other types of tests. There are lots of personality tests, in the industry and in society today, but really we're talking about a face-to-face interview to make sure that this particular person really would fit in from your perspective into the culture of your organization. And then the medical exam, the DOT medical certification, again, DOT required. And then the last thing from a best practices, 6 most effective screening practices, is physical ability testing, going beyond the DOT certification, going beyond the DOT requirements. See, can this person do the job? Can they lift, a certain amount of weight? Are there aspects to the job that this person, from a physical standpoint, is going to be able to do or not do? So again, it's a best practice that comes out of some of the recent research. So before we jump to technology and I hand it over to Sean, I don't know if this is a good point stop and again take some questions, Tim?
Yeah, I'll just see. Have we? Again, I invite anyone to drop some questions into either the chat or the question module on the right of your screen there. But interesting the way that you're sort of approaching this here, Dave, around the fact that there's a much broader sort of holistic approach, more qualitative than quantitative potentially when you're looking at driver qualification. How deep do some carriers go with this? It's been mentioned before around social media account screening or going down the path of some, more complex kind of behavioral tests like the Myers-Briggs or something like that. How far have you seen carriers go to try and get a real flavor for the people that they're looking at employing, given it is such a costly exercise to lose and replace drivers in this sort of environment?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because it's not only costly to lose drivers, it's also costly to onboard drivers, right? And all of these things take time and cost money. So it's a balancing act. It's how much do you do on the front end, and where do you do these screenings on the front end, and how many do you do? And I think the background check is a great example. Again, you have to do MBRs, you have to do past employment and drug and alcohol testing history. You don't have to do credit, you don't have to do crim history, you don't have to do PSP, but a lot of carriers do it. A lot of, particularly PSP, that's really safety focused, safety specific. They do go beyond. The good ones all go beyond the minimum DOT requirements, and they all go beyond sort of even minimum best practices. And drug screening is a good example, using hair. The safe, responsible fleets go beyond that urine test, because I think it's been determined that there are better ways and better specimens to test for drug screening, and you really, in a safety sensitive industry like trucking, you sure don't want a lifestyle drug user behind the wheel of a large commercial motor vehicle. So to answer your question, yes, they go well beyond minimums, even beyond best practices in some cases. But again, it's a bit of a balancing act, because you want to hire the person, right? You want to get them on board and get them on board quickly, but you got to do your due diligence.
Absolutely, and I can see you get one shot at that, and if you make the wrong decision, it could be a very costly decision that you've made moving down.
Well, and to drill down a little bit more on that, and I see that we got a question in the queue, and I want to make sure we get to it. But your part of your question was around what are fleets doing around sort of social media monitoring, pre-employment, and personality testing. And I think social media was sort of a popular way to look at things when it was originally coming out, but I think most carriers have abandoned that as a pre-employment strategy, because it takes a long time. Plus, maybe you don't need to see all of that, and it's less relevant, and you don't want to make decisions based on something that's not a hard fact. And I think on personality testing, we're still seeing it being used, but not necessarily in a pre-employment space. They're becoming more effective for like team building exercises and understanding what motivates people, how to get them, how to drive them to be safer or to accomplish the task that you want them to accomplish. So they have a good role there, but maybe not in pre-employment. And I think if I remember the study correctly, Dave, social media monitoring came in pretty low as effective. I think most of the carriers rated it almost not effective at all.
Yeah, that's right. Particularly from a safety standpoint, the focus of this study that Sean and I are referring to, it had a safety focus, a safety nexus of these screening practices. And Sean's right. It has been abandoned by many fleets because they just don't see a true nexus to safety. And it's kind of like you can't unsee, what you saw, and maybe that wasn't relevant, and maybe you're going to make the wrong decision based on something you shouldn't have seen in the first place.
Awesome. Raven has come through and asked a pretty relevant question, I think. Can you explain more about physical ability testing and health and fitness testing? I guess, how have you seen that carried out before with some of your clients?
Yeah, there are a lot of trucking companies that we've seen don't do the physical agility testing themselves. They use third parties to do it, the people who have expertise in developing the test, who have sort of researched and have tests that are based on that research. So physical agility and ability testing is a thing in the industry. A lot of companies use it, particularly those drivers and companies that have to, touch the freight, load and unload. But it's not something that the company itself always does. It's typically a third-party vendor approach, and there's good reasons for that, right? Because they're experts. They've developed the test. They know how to administer it and administer it uniformly so that there's not any disparate treatment and so forth. So that's one aspect of the answer. I don't know if Sean has a different thought or.
Yeah, one of the most interesting ways that I've seen this being used and talk to people about it is actually to sort of establish a baseline, right? If you have physical ability testing early on, there are some companies that'll even do like a full body scan, and they'll be able to understand where you're at coming in. So they're not looking to disqualify you, right? Because you're medically certified, so on and so forth. But they are looking to understand that, if you had an injury on the job, is that injury work-related? Is it exacerbating an injury that you had before you came in? Or is the one they're discussing, not related? So I think there's what's the word I'm looking for? Like a risk mitigation or sort of a risk tolerance that people are trying to understand, risk management from a claims perspective that a lot of folks are using physical ability testing to do today.
Interesting. Hopefully that answers the question for you, Raven, but keep the questions coming. Anything that pops up here that we're not covering properly or you want to hear a little bit more about, feel free to jump in. Back to you, Sean.
Yeah, all right. Well, so, hey, going too many slides here, going crazy. Yeah, so let's talk about technology. We talked about safety culture. We talked about how important the people are. Now let's talk about, how we can live that culture every day by giving drivers the tools they need to succeed. And we talked a lot about that in the safety management culture. Like, hey, are we spending time giving people the tools they need to succeed? And in the context of safety culture, that really demonstrates, I think, to drivers that what they do matters and that you're not looking to give them a gotcha scenario. You're looking to make sure that they succeed. And adopting safety technology is a great way to do that. There's a number of different types of safety technologies, obviously. There's on-vehicle safety technology. That's what everybody thinks about. We'll break that down into two categories. The first is active, the second is passive. I know there are some technology purists who will disagree with my definition of an active technology, but the way I think about active safety technology is technology on your truck that can actively mitigate a dangerous circumstance and avoid a crash, right? Something that's going to take over for the driver and keep them in their lane or apply the brakes or make sure they don't roll over in the case of electronic stability control, and to a limited extent, speed limiters, right? I mean, those help mitigate the severity of a crash by keeping your speed at a reasonable level. It does sort of take some control away from the driver. So I think these are strong safety technologies. They provide awesome data, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. But then there's passive safety technology as well, right? And one thing I should say about active safety technology is one of the benefits of active safety technology is that it's a little bit easier to calculate that important ROI, right? And Tim, I'm sure you know a lot about ROI because you think about it in the context of how Whip Around helps their customers. But when carriers think about it too, active safety technologies sometimes are a little easier because you can look at your events through a year or over a course of time and say, these types of technologies would have mitigated those crashes, right? And that calculation becomes a little easier. With passive safety technology, it's a little different, right? Because these things are not taking over for the driver, not avoiding circumstances, they're really mitigating risk, right? And they're providing awesome coaching opportunities, and they're driving safety culture in that way. Like a lane departure warning system is going to tell the driver, hey, bud, you're going out of your lane, and a lane keep assist system is going to keep you in your lane, right? Blind spot detection, same thing. There's the wildly popular video-based onboard monitoring systems right now, which a number of studies have showed how effective those can be. I think we're big fans. They obviously mitigate risk. They provide almost instantaneous coaching opportunities sometimes as well. So these things are great, but they are a little harder to quantify. Now, our friends at VTTI, we talked about another VTTI study earlier, and we're going to sound like VTTI boosters. Maybe we should buy some stock in the university. I don't think you can do that, but maybe we should. They have a great ROI calculator on their website that they worked really hard on that helps carriers calculate the return on investment for certain technologies. And really, there's only three listed. I think it's automatic emergency braking. Dave's going to correct me, I'm sure. Lane departure warning, and then video cameras, right? And they help carriers think through what that ROI is going to be. But even if you're thinking about a technology that's not included there, you can use the thought process they lay out in that calculator to try to understand what are the things I got to think about here. What types of crashes am I potentially avoiding? You know, what are my insurance costs? What's my cost and my depreciation on this technology? That sort of thing. But passive safety technology is a great way to say to your driver, you know, I'm going to help you succeed. Finally, we have back office technology. This is usually a little bit more reactive, and that's because, you know, the data comes in a little bit late or a little bit earlier even, and then it's got to be sort of compiled and computed and then understood and put out there. Can it be also predictive? But, you know, these technologies are often come in the form of great dashboards that deliver great information that allow safety managers and companies to make safety-based business decisions based on that information. And then finally, and I think this is an important point to stress. When we talk about safety technology, we talk about all the sexy dashboards and the, you know, ability to avoid crashes. But there's another way where you can build efficiency, make your driver's life easier. And that's going to allow your driver to focus a little bit more time on what? Driving, perhaps? You know, so ELDs, obviously, those are mostly mandated. How about automatic transmissions? Now I don't have to clutch. I don't have to worry about what gear I'm in, going up or going down. I can focus on what's in front of me, what's behind me, right? So truck parking way bypass technology, so I can keep all that time for driving, and I don't have to worry about trying to make up space. Electronic DVIRs, I think we've got a fan of those in the room. You know, that's a great technology too, to just help a driver get through the process and to keep the record keeping clean. You know, and that's going to make his job easier. That's going to make the shop mechanic's job easier, and that's going to keep your whole program safer. So when we talk about safety technology, we love to talk about the bells and the whistles, the things that stop the truck. But let's not forget about the things that keep the truck moving, right? And I think these technologies can be an important part of that. So, you know, just a summary, active technologies avoid crashes. A little bit more quantifiable, though passive technologies are certainly quantifiable with a little bit extra sort of forethought. And I know that there's a lot of vendors out there that can help with that. And then finally, driver lifestyle. You know, we have to live safety every day, and driver lifestyle technologies can help you do that. And then, of course, they all produce actionable data, and I think we're going to talk about data here in a moment. But if you have any questions, Tim from the Peanut Gallery or otherwise, we'll be happy to take them now.
I'll invite any more questions to come through now. But I guess what's become obvious, Sean, just listening to you speak then, is I guess technology is now the entry level to being able to operate a safe and positive safety culture. Some of it's mandated, as you touched on, with ELD. Some of it's coming organically through the OEMs in some of these vehicles already having the lane assist and automatic transmission or whatever it might be. But do you think that's a fair comment that in this day and age, and what the expectation of the authorities certainly is as to what carriers should be considering a safe culture within their business, technology is an essential part of being able to deliver that?
Oh, I would absolutely agree with that sentiment. I think a big part of that is, and I think Dave touched on that, is sort of lifting your driver up a little bit. You know, I feel like drivers spent years and years in the industry just toiling, you know, just working, and they still do that. They still work hard, but maybe now we can provide them the technology that's going to make their life a little easier. They're going to appreciate that. They're going to know that you're committed to them and to their careers and to safety, and they're going to work to improve that. So I think it's absolutely essential. I'm certain Dave has something to say about safety technology, because I know he's a big booster.
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Sean. And so I wholeheartedly agree with Sean, and the question's interesting. The only thing I would add is that technology does have to come with a real communications plan and a real, strategy to make sure the drivers understand what's in it for them. How does it help them do their job? And if that's part of the equation, that yes, we communicate it before we ever put hang the aftermarket tech on the truck, or before we spec the truck with new tech. The drivers need to be communicated with, and they need to understand, and they need to be able to have the opportunity to ask questions of, what's in it for them, and how will the information be used? How will I be coached? Those types of things. So there's this coupling, and I also don't want to lose sight of the fact that drivers need to be trained on how to use it properly. So it's not just the tech and the return on the investment; it's the human, portion of how is it going to help me? How do I use it? How do I use it appropriately? Make sure they're trained up on it as well. So there's sort of a well-rounded equation here.
One of the questions we get all the time about safety technology is, what do I say to that driver who's going to argue that Big Brother is watching? That you're trying to play a game of gotcha with me, and all those things that Dave just discussed, like, that's essentially packaging the talking points of the benefit of safety and delivering those to the driver in a way that they can understand, and training the driver on exactly what does this technology do? What does it look like? What are the measurements that it's taking, the metrics I'm going to be measured against, and how can I use that to improve, And so Dave's absolutely right. And shame on me for not saying how important it is. You can't just buy a technology and strap it on the truck, man. You've got to work through the benefits, and you've got to, make sure that all levels of your organization understand that. I mean, we just started a fleet who had adopted some good safety technology, and we did a gap analysis, and we talked to some of the folks on the ground. They didn't know how to use it, so they just weren't getting the benefit they should have. So thanks, Dave.
You're spot on there. From a whip around perspective, one of the things we invest heavily in and are always looking for ways to improve is that implementation phase of whip around. And on the face of it, we have really easy to use technology, but the importance of getting drivers in particular, but anyone within the organization, to understand its functionality and capability is just such a critical part of success. So I couldn't echo that anymore.
Yeah, thanks. Well, should we scoot on to data here for a second and get talking about ones and zeros? Okay, I'd like to show this slide. It just really says, wowza, look at all the data out there. Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google, said between the beginning of time, really, and 2003, we had 5 exabytes of data. I don't actually know how much that is, but it seems like a lot. But now we get that much every 2 days. And, down here in the very bottom, we can see that up to 2013, we had 4.4 zettabytes of data. And today we got 44 zettabytes. A zettabyte is 900 billion gigabytes. Raise your hand if you played Nintendo, 8 bits. That wasn't even that long ago. Now we're talking about 9 billion gigabytes of data. So there's a ton of data coming at us all the time. And there's a quote I like to use. Each bit of data tells a story, and trying to understand that story, what it's trying to tell you, is the important part. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. I mean, data sources like that slide demonstrated continue to grow. Every day we get more data, and some of this data has been around a long time, and it's just something that we used to do as trucking companies to qualify our drivers. We created a driver qualification file. It had an application in there, had a verification of employment, had the MVR, the license, all of that. Some of that data we've known for a long time. And you know what? We haven't done a great job like understanding what it's telling us and acting on it, creating great hiring standards or understanding which drivers are more likely to be safe than others, right? So there's all of this data that we can't forget about. Vehicle maintenance data. That's another spot of data that we've been collecting for years, ever since FMCSA told us to. DVIRs that you guys do, you know, preventative maintenance, periodic inspections, work orders. We've had all this data that, you know, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 60 years ago, when Dave used to, you know, inspect carriers, it was just paper in a file, you know. Well, now it's in a database, and we can start asking questions to that database and really starting to understand what it's trying to tell us. Of course, we have ongoing driver and vehicle data. This is data that we're collecting every day. This is that sexy data that comes right off of the vehicle, out of the ECM, you know, and has all the bells and whistles. Internally generated data. So we've got data from departments like HR and from payroll, and all of that data can be helpful as well. Can't forget about your claims and loss data. That's going to tell you what types of accidents you're having, where they're severe and why. And then, of course, the government gives us a ton of data too. CSA came out, you know, whatever that was, 15 years ago, and you know, the industry just kind of freaked out about all of the data that was available to everybody. But now the trucking industry often relies on that data to understand where their challenges are. So tons of data. We're going to continue to get more data. This data comes from all parts of your organization, and it comes at all frequencies. It's just flying at you like the beginning of Star Wars, you know, and it's hard to get your arms around it. Not all of this data is created equally, of course, depending on the question that you're asking or the response you're trying to get. So sort of trying to deal with that can be a real challenge, right? So how do we do that? What are our first steps? Well, you know, if you're starting sort of with a blank slate, the first thing I want to do is create a committee, a working group, right? And I want support from up top, and I want a representative from all parts of my organization to sit down and say, hey, here's the information I collect. And maybe here, let's not call it data, let's call it information, right? Because people think of data, they think of ones and zeros. But I want to know, hey, what info are you guys collecting? What info are you guys collecting? What do you think it's telling us? Let's catalog all of our data sources, and then we're going to want to start small with data that has a direct impact on the health of our organization, right? So those are normally the bigger pieces of data that say, you know, drivers aren't conducting post-trip inspections. You know, that's a big data point. Let's focus on that, you know, and then depending on the question that you're asking, begin to weed out the noise, the pieces of data that don't speak to the question you're trying to ask, right? And from there, we're going to start to develop KPIs and use our catalog of data to determine what's most important, right? And here, we're going to try not to forget about, you know, we're not just going to look at that sexy like on-vehicle data. We're going to try to look at all of the various pieces of data in our organization, right? So, but how do we do that? Well, one of the best ways is to learn how to visualize your data, right? How do we create a dashboard to collect data from disparate parts of my organization into one spot so that I can start asking it questions and understanding what it's going to tell me? And this is one of the most daunting tasks in trucking, I think. But here, this is where vendors have succeeded, I think. And, you know, not all vendors know everything about trucking, but you know a lot about your organization. So talk to your vendor. Start asking your vendor these questions. There's folks that will compile data from all different kinds of vendors, and there's vendors that are integrated with other vendors like you are. And, you know, so speaking with your vendors today about how do I collect all of the data that I had and how do I bring it together into one dashboard so I understand it is, I think, key to sort of winning in this space, right? When you're just starting, also, you want to kind of start with your lagging indicators. So what the heck is a lagging indicator? That's like that's like, I'm having crashes. I need to avoid them. Okay, so what are your lagging indicators? Well, most of my crashes are occurring at this area. Okay, maybe we'll start routing around it, and then we'll see if that changes, right? And then from there, you want to move towards sort of leading indicators. Another good example of a lagging indicator or of a leading indicator might be, all right, I've been having a lot of crashes. I'm doing lots of different things. I'm having a hard time sort of understanding where that's coming from. Let's look at some of that legacy data that I have that might be a leading indicator. So maybe my driver hiring standards aren't quite right. Maybe I'm not doing a good job understanding, matching the right drivers to the right trucks, that sort of thing. So you want to start with the lagging indicators, the very obvious safety problems that you have, and move more towards refining that model and moving towards the leading indicators. Again, data visualization is key. If you can't see it, you can't sort of react to it, right? So finally, I'll say safety is iterative, and Tim, you've heard me say this before. The safety process is a circle, and you've got to continue. You've never won safety, right? You just always need to continue to get better. So you need to continue to use this data and continue to build out sort of more complex models. We want to get to sort of these predictive risk models. That's ultimately our goal is to get the data to such a spot that you can say, all right, if I see this trend, then I need to fix it today because it'll ultimately turn into this new thing. Again, always lean on your vendors, never be complacent. And the last thing I'll say about data is data without context is kind of worthless, right? Absolute numbers tell me almost nothing. So, for example, let's say I'm comparing my drivers, right? And I think that failure to obey a traffic control device is a very serious thing that leads to crashes in the future. And Dave, he's got 7 of these on his record. 7 failure to control a traffic device. And Tim's only got 3. So of course I'm going to go to Dave and say, Dave, man, this is not working out for you. You might find a new place to work because we don't like this. But what I failed to do was put it in context, because Tim's been working for me for 2 weeks. Dave's been working for me for 10 years. Now who's got the problem, right? So as we think about data, let's think about data in context. One occurrence does not a trend make. So we just want to make sure that we're always looking, making sure that the data that we're looking at is worthwhile. And then finally, the last thing I'll say about it is, you need to make sure your data is meaningful, and one of the ways that you do that is sort of quality control on data collection, right? Every once in a while, you want to make sure that you can make all your people click all the boxes that you want to make sure that some process is getting complete, but if you're not going in and checking the details of that data, then it might be telling you the wrong story. So if you're requiring your drivers to do DVIRs, right? We love this example, obviously. If you're requiring your drivers to do DVIRs, and then you look and you're like, well, there's a whole stack of DVIRs here. They must be doing a great job doing DVIRs. Everything passed, so everything's good. But you haven't taken the time to look at them and to make sure that, okay, if something did fail, it was repaired, there was that sign-off signature, that sort of thing, then the data that you're getting from it, that DVRs are getting done and all vehicles pass those DVRs, that's not reliable, right? So every once in a while, you've got to go back into your organization, back into your data collection to understand that, to make sure that that's being done properly and that the information you're looking at, is helpful in some way. So that's kind of what I had. Hopefully that was helpful. I don't know if you have any questions, Tim, or I'll pop it over to this slide. You can do your little shimmy too.
Unless Dave has anything to add on the data piece, I think that was a nice way to sort of recap on such a critical part of building a safety program. Really appreciate all the insight there. A huge amount, even as is always the case, listening to you guys talk. There's ideas coming in around how we can look at our product differently and help our customers in a different way. So really appreciate the deep dive there. This is about the safety program. It's not a sales pitch about Whip Around, and I appreciate we've got a number of our customers on this webinar, but we really do believe that what we do at Whip Around supports our customers to affect a safety culture within their business. And whether that's really focused on compliance or whether it's a broader sort of mandate that they have to try and establish some of the things that you talked about today, I think we really do offer some value. We covered culture, people, technology, and data, and Whip Around really does wrap around all of that to help you affect, measure, monitor, and as Sean says time and time again, safety is iterative, and what we enable our customers to do is really identify and measure where things could be improved, what's going well, why it's going well, and where to focus some of that energy. You mentioned there the stack of DVIRs and all of them passed, and you sort of can walk away and think, happy days, there's nothing I need to do there. That is a core problem that we have faced over the years with our customers, and our eDVIR solution. Some of the advice we give when we're creating custom forms for our customers is around some of our compulsory photo taking technology in there, which is asking drivers to take photos of different points around the vehicle to sort of prove that they got out of the cab, that they actually walked around and inspected some of those components. The term pencil whipping is something that we've heard for many years from many of the carriers that we deal with. So when we look at Whip Around Inspect, which is where Whip Around started its life in the early days, really focused on the DVIR solution for our customers, has evolved now to really enable customization around not just vehicles and DVIR compliance, but a lot of other assets and equipment that our customers are looking to inspect for maintenance, but also have a real safety focus on as well. We are seeing customers customize forms for different processes that aren't necessarily directly related to assets. We have job site safety analysis forms in the construction industry being used in the same workflow through our drivers app. When it comes to compliance, we have built the solution with compliance in mind, and that vehicle maintenance basic, probably something I'm going to have to get tattooed on my body at some point in my life, because it's become front and center for us, and we really do work to ensure that we comply with all of these things that our customers are required to do under that vehicle maintenance basic. For DVIR, it's the signature workflow from mechanics and drivers and citing previous inspections. And when we look at technology and data in the context of a safety culture, more and more of our customers are operating from different locations, particularly over the last year in COVID. You have drivers and assets in different places. So the traditional paper-based workflows that businesses have been relying on to try and implement and monitor and measure how some of these things are happening has just become ineffective. So using technology like Whip Around to be able to centralize that, to receive real-time alerts and notifications when you have critical issues or defects within your fleet, is giving you that opportunity to act quickly, to stop these risks becoming real nightmares out on the road and causing accidents or getting your drivers or your company in trouble with violations or fines or infringements from weigh stations and whatnot. So the ability for Whip Around to come in and wrap around that is very real. We've evolved from just the inspect piece over the last couple of years and really completed that vehicle maintenance sort of holistic workflow tool. And Whip Around Maintain enables the maintenance component of this. So enabling you to set service schedules, whether that's based on recommended OEM service periods. You can capture mileage through the app if you're not capturing that through some tracking device. We are working on a number of integrations. We currently integrate with the likes of Geotab, Verizon, RTA on the back end. We're looking at some of the other larger telematics companies out there to share that information, bring fault codes in, bring mileage into Whip Around, and enable a really seamless workflow, creating work orders for mechanics, whether you're internal mechanics, external vendors, combining the defects that are being flagged on those inspections and some of the service intervals and events that are popping up, pulling them into work orders with the click of a button, sending them across to your shop or your suppliers, and being able to track parts and labor costs, being able to track the accountability through that process of who is owning the repair, the correction of some of these defects and issues, and being able to go and look back over time if you are potentially getting an audit or you're just looking to sort of self-assess where that safety program is for your organization. You can go back and see how that process is going, where the weaknesses are, and potentially identify areas where you might want to spend time improving on. So all of that easily stored in the cloud. We touched about the importance of driver onboarding and implementation within your organization, a big focus for us. We've built this product with simplicity and ease of use in mind, and we have a huge amount of positive customer feedback online for anyone that wants to go and look at the likes of Capterra or some of the other review sites about how their drivers have adopted this. And the buy-in that they've got, that really this isn't about a big brother approach for them, forcing technology to keep eyes on them. It really does give them a voice within this whole safety culture and safety management process. The feedback loop from mechanics on where defects have been identified, where they're at, progress reports, communication, all comes back to the driver in a way that they feel really empowered about the role that they play in that whole culture building process around safety. So if you haven't seen Whip Around yet and you'd like to, please reach out to us, whiparound.com. We'd love to have a chat. Mention that you saw us on this webinar, and we will absolutely look after you. Also, let us know if there's other topics that you'd like us to talk with Dave and Sean about moving forward. We want to do these as regularly as we can, and we really appreciate the feedback that we get from our audience around topics that they want to hear about. Sean, Dave, I might hand over to you, Dave. Do you want to let everyone know if they want to go a little bit deeper on some of these issues, if they have a need for some more one-on-one type consulting, how can they get in touch with you guys at Scope Elitis?
Sure. Probably the easiest way is giving us a call. We're at 202-728-2851 or 2853 for Sean. Or if you want to go to our website, we also have a contact form on our website. It's scopeelitisconsulting.com. And right at the top of the homepage, there is a form you can fill out, and it's very simple, and it comes directly to us, and then we contact you via email. So, and we've got our services and so forth on there, so appreciate the opportunity to sort of tee that up, Tim. And again, thanks for the chance to do this with you and with the Whip Around team. And these are always great, and I hope we provided some value for your customers.
Fantastic. No, you absolutely did. And reach out to me, Tim at whiparound.com. I can either put you in touch with Dave and Sean very easily, or ask any further questions. We're happy to help you out and give you any advice and plug you into these guys as well. So thanks everybody for joining us today. I can see someone typing possibly a question here, whatever it might be. No. So look, if anything does pop in the next minute or so, I'll come back to you directly with an answer. But thanks for being here today. Really appreciate it. And, thanks, Dave and Sean.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate you.
Cheers, guys. See ya.
Yep. Bye now.